transmitter from there, as otherwise we're going to continue in Estonian and it will be your chance to learn very quickly or take advantage of the technology that the 21st century has provided. Thank you. Alright. Tere hommikust! Kas kõigil on olemas see annus kohvi, teed või vett, mida teil on vaja, et esialgsed tunnid üle elada? Tundub, et nii on. Ei ole päris. Tere hommikust! Ja siis teen ka enne ametlikku algust väikse lisakontrolli, et kas kõik inimesed on ennast ilusasti kirja pannud osaluslehele, et me saaksime Euroopa Liidule ilusasti kinnitada, et tegelikult te ka kõik käisite siin. Kui ei ole, siis taas kord on teha selline paaniline jooks või siis kohvipausi ajal kerge hüpe selle osaluslehe juurde. Okei, aga nende sõnadega siis tere tulemast. Minu nimi on Anna Karolin ja ma olen selle ürituse moderaator. Ja oleme siis täna siin, et arutada natuke selle üle, et kuidas siis Euroopa Parlamendi saadikud peaksid oma tööd tegema ja kuidas meie peaksime nende saadikutega rääkima, kas üldse ja kui palju nende poole pöörduma. Selleks, et me kõik saaksime töötada parema Euroopa Liidu nimel. Ja enne kui ma räägin ürituse kavast, siis mul oleks hea meel kutsuda ette Avatud Eesti Fondi juhataja Mall, kes võib-olla siis teeb väikse sissejuhatuse sellest, et miks me üldse sellest teemast räägime ja miks Avatud Eesti Fond selle ürituse on korraldanud.
Tere päevast, mina olen Mall Avatud Eesti Fondist. Tere, mina olen Mall Avatud Eesti Fondist, nagu Anna ütles. Ja ma väga lühidalt räägiksin sellest, mida see suur üle-euroopaline projekt kujutab endast. See on nimelt täielikult altpoolt tulnud vabaühenduste algatus, üle-euroopaline, kus siis Euroopa Liidu liikmesriikide, tähendab enamuse liikmesriikide väga mitmed ühendused, pluss siis ka kandidaatriigi Serbia ja potentsiaalse tulevase kandidaatriigi Albaania ühendused on otsustanud ühte kokku tulla ja arutada enne Euroopa Parlamendi valimisi, milliseid sõnumeid anda edasi tulevastele Euroopa Parlamendi liikmetele Euroopa Liidu liikmesmaadest ja ka väljaspool seda. Ilmselt pole saladus see, et väga paljud, võib-olla isegi enamus Euroopa Liidu inimestest ei ole rahul selle viisiga, kuidas tehakse poliitikat, kuidas teavitatakse inimesi, kuidas konsulteeritakse nendega ja kuidas neid haaratakse kaasa ja hõivatakse Euroopa asjade arutamisse. Ja selle arutelu formaat on nüüd selline, et need sellised suuremad ja väiksemad sorti läbirääkimised nii-öelda vabaühenduste endi vahel toimuvad mitmes liikmesriigis, aga nõnda, et meie näiteks tänasesse arutellu päeva või hommikuse osa teises pooles haakuvad ka Hollandi, Horvaatia, Itaalia ja Rumeenia vabaühendused ja annavad edasi oma mõtted nende aruteludest ja samuti Saksamaal Democracy Internationali eestvedaja haakub meie vestlusega hiljem. Ning loodame saada tänasest mõttevahetusest neid ettepanekuid, mis lisatakse siis meie ühisesse võib öelda ettekujutusse sellesse, kuidas võiks poliitika tegemine Euroopas välja näha. Aga muidugi nende debattide ja arutelude jooksul ei rääkida ainult kaasamisest, vaid ka sellest näiteks, millised on Euroopa Liidu kodaniku õigused aga ka kohustused, et kuidas peaks üldse kujundatama nii institutsioonides kui ka liikmesriikide tasandil üleüldise Euroopa poliitikaid, tegelikult neid poliitikaid, mis puudutavad meid kõiki lõppude lõpuks. Teatavasti mitte ainult Eestis, aga üleüldiselt Euroopa Liidu liikmesriikides kuskil 80% seadusandlikest aktidest on seotud nende algatustega, mis on loodud, mis on tekkinud Euroopa Komisjonis ja kahjuks me teame sellest liiga vähe, meile räägitakse sellest liiga vähe ja võib-olla siin ongi nüüd see õige hetk, kui tuleb uus Euroopa Parlament, nimetatakse uus Euroopa Komisjon, tulevad uued Euroopa välisteenistuse liikmed ja esindajad tööle, et just neile anda edasi ja sõnum, et midagi peab muutuma, et me ei saa seda enam niimoodi jätkata, et kogu Euroopa Liidu poliitikate algatamine ja kujundamine toimub äärmiselt hierarhiliselt ja väga bürokraatlikult. Võib-olla mõnes liikmesriigis on ta teistmoodi, mõnes omamoodi, aga üleüldine arvamus on see, et inimestele pühendatakse liiga vähe aega, et tutvustada neid poliitikaid, et inimeste arvamust saada, et siis vastavalt ka liikmesriikide arvamusi kujundada ja seisukohti välja töötada, aga ka Euroopa Parlamendi liikmete poolt, et ka nemad saaksid tagasisidet ja seda väga olulist teavet, et mida siis erinevad huvigrupid mõtlevad ühest või teisest asjast, mida mõtlevad erinevad eksperdist ja ka mida mõtleb keskmine kodanik. Nii et loodame, et ka selle väikse aruteluga täna anname meie siin oma panuse, oma mõtetega ja kindlasti ja teatavasti toimub ja on toimumas ka erinevaid teisi debatte ja see ei ole siin loomulikult mitte ainus. Ja nii me saamegi võib-olla anda selle tugevama sõnumi meie Euroopa Parlamendi tulevastele liikmetele, et me ei taha, et asi niimoodi jätkuks, nagu ta siiani on toimunud. Ja nüüd fondi poole pealt nii palju, et me oleme aastaid olnud suured Euroopa debati toetajad ja ka vedajad ja me oleme ka haaratud sellisesse suurde projekti, mille nimi on uus Euroopa lepe. See on väga ambitsioonikas üle-euroopaline ettevõtmine, jällegi altpoolt tulnud ja mis haarab siis suuremaid Euroopa huvilisi organisatsioone kõikidest Euroopa Liidu liikmesriikidest. Nii et loodame, et ka see uus Euroopa lepe, mis on selline kodanikualgatus täielikult ja ehedalt, annab ka tulevastele meie esindajatele, aga ka kõrgetele ametnikele selle väga tugeva signaali, et Euroopa otsustusprotsess peab muutuma horisontaalsemaks ja ilma inimeste kaasamiseta me kaugeneme veelgi enam ja seda ei ole meile kellelegi vaja. Aga aitäh teile kõigile tulemast täna ja sellesse aruteluringi haakumast ja ma annan nüüd sõna meie tänase päeva moderaatorile Annale.
Aitäh Malle selle sissejuhatava sõnavõtu eest. Et enne kui me pihta hakkame, tutvustan siis natuke meie tänast päevakava, et mis meid siis ees ootab, mis teil kindlasti ees on, aga sellegipoolest kordamine on tarkuse ema või siis vähemalt tädi. Et juba pärast seda, kui mina olen siin natuke aega rääkinud, saame siis kuulata põnevat ettekannet Tartu Ülikooli Riigiteaduste Instituudi lektori Stefano Bragiroli käest, kes siis räägib Euroopa Parlamendi valimistest sellel aastal ja räägib siis põhimõtteliselt sellest, kuidas ja kas Euroopa Parlamendi valimised võiks olla Euroopa kodanike ja institutsioonide vaheline ühenduslüli. Ja lisaks sellele meil on siis võimalus Stefanoga ka natuke arutleda ja küsida talt küsimusi, et kuidas tema siis seda teemat näeb. kui see on võib-olla see akadeemiline pool, siis pärast seda me saame pildi, nagu ka Mal rääkis, mujalt Euroopast, ehk siis meile tulevad tänapäeva imelise tehnoloogia abil küll rumeenlased, horvaatlased, hollandlased, itaallased ja saksamaalased või sakslased, kes siis räägivad sellest, kuidas nende riikides kaasamine käib ja kui hästi sellega hakkama saadakse. Ja pärast seda tuleks siis, ütleme, peaaegu kõige, ma ütles kohe otsa välja, kõige olulisem arutelu osa või selle ürituse osa, mis on siis meie enda omavaheline arutelu, meie enda mõtted, mõnikord ka tunded, aga peamiselt siis head mõtted nii sellest, kas tegemist on probleemiga ja kui tõsise probleemiga, kui ka meie enda pakutud lahendused, kuidas meie võiksime ise viia näiteks tõrjutute hääli paremini Euroopa Liidule lähedale ja mida saaksid eurosaadikud ära teha selleks, et ka inimeste hääli rohkem kuulda. Ja seda me siis proovime teha sellise väga, ma ei tahaks öelda interaktiivse fookusgrupi, aga sisuliselt sellise sõbraliku, mitteformaalse vestluse ringi raames. Ja selle aruteluga me siis ka selle ürituse lõpetame, et teie arutelu mõtted siis lähevad kirja, lähevad siis osaks sellest projektist ja jõuavad ka siis eurosaadikutele, edastame need kindlasti ka siis Eesti tulevastele eurosaadikutele, kes kindlasti on väga huvitatud, arvestades, et nad meie kõikide hääli tulevastel valimistel otsivad. Ja ürituse lõpetame siis loomulikult kerge püstijalal lõunaga, et siis terava arutelu teid ära ei väsitaks. Aga nende sõnadega kõigepealt siis teeme, enne kui ma annan sõna Stefanole, teeme väikse siis kontrolli. Et kui paljud teist on üldse rääkinud eelmise või siis praeguse, enne valimisi, praeguse mõne eurosaadikuga, ükskõik mis teemal? Otse, kuskil. Okei, mitte kõik osalejad. Kui eeldame, et mõnikord lihtsalt kohvi juures öeldakse tere ja on tore, kuidas siis Brüsselis läheb, et siis aga kas keegi meist on kunagi pöördunud ühe eurosaadiku või üldse Euroopa Parlamendi poole, et tõstatada mõni sisuline teema kui huvitatud kodanikuna? No mitte väga palju, ja mis ei ole üldse selleks, et nüüd öelda, et miks te ei ole aktiivsed, vaid pigem paneb mõtlema, eks ole, et kui palju me tegelikult ka ise seda initsiatiivi võtame ja arvestades, et tõenäoliselt siin olev publiku arv on keskmiselt kas haritud või siis ka Euroopa rindel rohkem aktiivne kui vähem. Nii et kui meiegi ise eurosaadikutega rääkinud pole või eurosaadikud pole meile tulnud meeleheitlikult pakkuma võimalust rääkida, et siis me võime kujutada ette, missugune on see olukord tavakodanike hulgas. Või siis kodanike hulgas, kes ei tegele igapäevaselt näiteks kas vabaühenduse või huvikaitse või millegi muu põnevaga. Aga see siis mõtlemiseks meile arutelu ossa, aga nüüd ongi mul väga hea meel anda sõna Stefanole, kes siis räägib meile inglise keeles Euroopa Parlamendi valimistest ja sellest akadeemilisest perspektiivist, et mida meil nendest valimistest oodata on. Kõik teie küsimused võite siis, ma usun, panna niimoodi endale märkmetena kirja ja siis saame pärast seda ettekannet ka nii Stefanut ristküsitleda sõbralikult, kui ka siis võib-olla pakkuda enda peegeldusi sellele, mida ta just rääkis. Palun!
Okay, welcome everybody. So today we'll try just to introduce a bit, the figure of the European Parliament, which is a very relevant one, and I will basically divide my presentation into three parts. First, I will define what's the role of the European Parliament in the disconnection between the citizens and the European Union. I will then focus on the electoral phase, and then I will conclude looking at some experiences that we're conducting in order to reconnect citizenry and the elected ones. So let me first start from a very point that I always try to stress when I talk about the European Parliament. So why is the European Parliament relevant in our discourse? Well, we shouldn't forget a few features of the European Parliament when it comes to the very nature of that assembly. Well, first of all, the European Parliament, and you might take that for granted, but definitely you shouldn't, is the only directly elected EU institution. And if you think of the very nature of the European Parliament as a transnational assembly, as an assembly that is composed of members coming from different member states, you should not even forget that that's the only directly elected transnational assembly existing in the globe. I just wrote almost, because just a couple of years ago, also the Mercosur Assembly in South America came to be directly elected. However, that's clearly a reflection of the experience that took place in Europe. And given its direct legitimation and its elective nature, it's basically the only directly representative institution in the EU. This means that in terms of legitimacy, it has a potential and a nature that is uncomparable to the other EU institutions. But still you might say, okay, but the European Parliament is not so effective, is not such a relevant institution if compared to the Commission or the Council. Well, that's not really true. I mean, the European Parliament started actually as an almost irrelevant body. It was basically a consultative assembly when the first European communities were established. But basically now we are dealing with a real co-legislator, a real decision maker that basically has the same powers in the legislative process as the Council of Ministers. What makes the European Parliament special is basically its nature, that on the one hand it's comparable in terms of powers with the national parliament, but in terms of composition makes it very special and particular. It brings together traditions and backgrounds of now 28 member states. That is, therefore, it's a multi-language and multinational background. Therefore, it combines different traditions, both political, cultural, and national. On the other hand, it is basically defined by two main lines of conflict. On the one hand, you have the political, ideological one that characterizes every elected chamber. On the other hand, you have the national one. Now, let's talk a bit about our challenges, what we are basically talking today. And let's go a bit distant from the European Parliament. So, when we look at the debate about European Union, at the debate about the current state of things in the Union, what we notice is basically the emergence of a number of challenges. First of all, distance. I mean, the European citizens perceive like Brussels as a distant entity. Moreover, they are not able to recognize what is approved in Brussels, what is approved at home, and what is approved like at subnational level. Therefore, it's difficult for them to locate the level of decisions. This has to do, of course, with another problem, the lack of accountability. If you don't know where decisions are taken, then obviously you don't know whom to judge for those decisions. This is also reflected by another problem, which is the lack of knowledge. It's difficult for Europe to talk to the normal citizens. And on the other hand, member states generally do not really want Europe to talk directly to the normal citizens. This somehow combined gives like the European citizen an idea that they do not really have a voice in what happens in Europe. And soon I will show you some data which clearly, confirm that. And therefore, citizens feel somehow powerless vis-à-vis the European institutions. And this picture is quite scary if you consider that, directly or indirectly, around 80% of the legislation that we have in our own national countries come from Brussels. So these 4 points somehow can be reflected in what can be broadly defined as the concept of democratic deficit of the European Union. If we add to that the current exogenous problems, the first one that comes to my mind is actually, for example, the economic crisis, that among the others just stresses the contradictions that are inside the European Union, and that exacerbate basically, the dissatisfaction of citizens and the perceived distance of themselves from Europe. Well, that picture seems to be quite scary. And the last point, in the past, the European Union, the observers about, the direction and the current state of things in the European Union used to say, okay, even if there is a democratic deficit, we shouldn't be so scared, because in the end the European Union justifies itself in terms of performance, of what it provides to the citizens. But as we can see, especially when it comes to the debate concerning the economic crisis, the growing insecurity, well, even this second point is now challenged. So basically, on the one hand, we have a quite evident democratic deficit. On the other hand, the performance of the EU is not so, let's say, so satisfactory as it used to be in the past. Now, what can be the answer to these challenges? Well, the answers are actually two. They are always like this. They are like this in every kind of institutional context. On the one hand, it's soft changes, which means simply using at best what we have so far. The other option is hard changes, which is like, simply changing reforming the institutional and constitutional structure of the EU. Now, as you know, in order to provide itself with the new treaty and the new institutional structure, basically the European institutions and the member states struggled for almost 10 years. The rejection of the constitution, Lisbon one, then Lisbon rejected by the Irish voters, then the new Lisbon. So obviously, in the short term, the possibility to change again the treaties is something unforeseeable. So the option that is so far viable is, to use at best what is provided by the current institutional framework of the EU. That is Lisbon. And let me stress again, considering what I said already about the European Parliament and about the very democratic, nature and the big potential that it has, whatever change we decide to implement and whatever action we decide to take in order to make the EU closer to the citizens, then definitely the European Parliament has to be a protagonist in that, has to be the pivot of this reform. And why is the picture so scary? Okay, we said disillusionment, distance, and so on, but okay, these are a few data just showing the decline in participation in the European elections. In the last 30 years, from 1979, the first elected European Parliament, to the past ones. Now, in less than 30 years, the average of citizens voting decreased by 20%. So this picture is already pretty scary. So now, less than 50% of the potential voters, actually around 43% of those who have the right to vote in European elections do actually vote. And we will see in a while why is it like that. But an even scarier picture, I do not really want to make you, terrorized, but I really want to stress how relevant is the issue. This is basically the decline in participation in the last election by member state. Now, generally, what is suggested is that, okay, the story is the same for the European elections, for the national elections. The voters are increasingly disillusioned about politics, and so they tend to participate less. But as you can see here, the story is a bit different. The story is that in national elections, participation is quite high, and that's basically the blue line. While in European elections, the participation is low. And again, you might tell me, okay, in all member states, for example, you vote for the European elections, it's already 40 years that you vote for European elections, people get disillusioned. But if you look at those who are at the end of the line, well, these are not the old member states. These are member states that joined in 2004 and 2007. That's the case of Slovakia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Czech Republic, Slovenia, and so on and so forth. In those countries, the average of those who vote in the national election is quite high, but those who vote for the European elections is low. So this means that these voters are particularly disillusioned, and on the other hand, the interesting thing is that they just joined the European Union. Now, what does this suggest? Well, the point is that why should we invert the trend? Why should we try, to make citizens aware of the importance of participating to the European elections? I don't want to be a Euro evangelist, but let's say I just want to show what might be the consequence and what are actually the consequences so far. So the least people vote in the European election, the less the European Parliament is legitimized. And by reflection, the least the European Union is legitimized. And the least, of course, it represents what are the real cleavages in the European society. On the other hand, who are those who are more likely to participate in the elections? Not the disillusioned normal citizens, but the radical positions. I mean, if you are disillusioned mainstream average citizens, you have less chances to participate than, you know, those who tend to reflect radical ideas. So in the end, what you would end up having is a European Parliament that is unbalanced in terms of representation of radical parties and populist parties. And this, of course, would, you know, increase just the disconnection between between the real state of things in Europe and what you find in the Parliament. On the other hand, given this trend of less legitimation and less representation, there will be also a growing disconnection in terms of what is national politics that is considered to be, you know, the relevant arena, and the European arena that is considered to be the irrelevant one. And as I already said, that's something totally untrue, simply because 80% of what affects our lives comes from Brussels. Now, the other indirect effect of that is that the protest, like if you think, for example, of the current crisis, you know, the disaffection of the citizens, of the voters, and so on. If these citizens are not able to convey, I mean, their complaints, their fears within the European institutions, then basically the protest will move out of the institutions and will go basically to the streets, which clearly might represent a bigger challenge. Obviously, you know, the presence of radical and the populist parties within the European Parliament makes the decision process more complicated and more chaotic, and basically there will be a growing disconnection between in and out the EU institution, and the circle, the vicious circle, is likely to repeat itself. Just want to show you the last point. This is the blue line. Basically shows. Yes.
Võib-olla see on siis meie eurooplased, kes on
Europe is calling.
Yes, an hour early.
Okay.
Helistavad edasi, aga me ei kuule lihtsalt.
So this blue line basically shows the level of support for European Union. The popularity, I mean, the level of support for the European Union. Now, as you can see, basically here you have a number of events. The oil crisis in the 70s, the first European Parliament election, the introduction of Schengen, Euro, and so on and so forth. Here you have the economic crisis. What you see is that 47% is the lowest level ever touched in terms of support among the European citizens. So, I just wanted to show by showing this, how the issue is relevant. But now let's look at those, at the European voters, at what are their characteristics and what makes them interested or not interested. So, unfortunately, we do not have surveys so far with respect to the next European elections. So I should refer to the data concerning the past European elections. So basically, these are data taken from Eurobarometer. And they basically show what's the level of interest or non-interest in participating in the European elections. Now, if you see, take for example age, which is a quite relevant indicator. The quite interesting point is that among the youngest generations, the level of interest is much lower than among the more mature ones. So basically, what should be, the most, let's say, how can I say, the growing flowers of Europe? Well, then in the end, they are not. They show a quite structural lack of interest, and the more the age grows, and the more the interest grows. Another point is that education somehow relates quite clearly with the level of interest in European elections. Those who study more are more aware and are given more tools in order to understand the complexity of the phenomenon. And therefore, among them, the level of interest is almost double than among the least educated. Here, basically, you see the same story. That is basically the likelihood to vote in the European elections. As you can see, the education, again, denotes, is a very relevant indicator. And again, even the age. Here, basically, probably you cannot read, but I will translate it for you. Why do voters decide not to participate? What are the main reasons why somebody decides not to vote? Among the three main reasons, you find that you do not believe that your vote will change anything. So simply, I mean, why should I vote if nothing changes? You do not sufficiently know the role of the European Parliament, so basically you are unaware and uninformed, and you're not interested in the European elections. So, in an interest, like an information and, powerless, sense of powerlessness. And again, how do you choose your candidate? Well, generally on the basis of the experience in European affairs, on the positions of candidates on national issues, and position of candidates on European issues. So, as you can see here, there is a mix between European and national dimension. But, let's return to our, factors of disillusionment. So, these are, on the other hand, data just collected in 2013. So, just very fresh ones. Which of the following are the best ways of ensuring your voice is heard by decision makers in the EU? And then you can see that despite, the state of disillusionment and so on, still, most of the citizens mention as the first point voting in the European Parliament elections and writing to your MEPs. So, somehow, there is a room for improvement and for, strengthening the representation at the European level. Okay, what does, as I said, okay, there are two ways of changing. One is changing the institutional structure. One is using at best the institutional structure in order to, somehow give the possibility of these, to this potential to actually impact the decision-making process of the EU. So, as you know, the current institutional framework of the EU is provided by the Lisbon Treaty and by the, amended treaties in the light of the current institutional reform. And basically, what the Lisbon Treaty states is that the action of the European Union should be delimited by three principles. The first one is conferral, which means basically the European Union can do only what is conferred by the member states and what is defined by the treaties. The second point, subsidiarity, which means basically the European Union acts only where the levels that are below it, that is national and subnational, cannot act at best. That is like, to bring the actions close to the citizens. And the third one, the European Union should act proportionally. That is, it shouldn't go beyond what is basically necessary to achieve its objectives. So these are the three principles that generally define the action of the European Union. But in terms of participation of the citizens, what does the Lisbon Treaty provide? Well, there are a few interesting points that have been introduced by the Lisbon Treaty, of which the most relevant one is obviously the citizens' initiative. Initially, during the constitutional debate, both the citizens' initiative and the possibility of a pan-European referendum were introduced. However, with the Lisbon Treaty, only the citizens' initiative remained. What is the citizens' initiative? Briefly, well, basically, it's the possibility that European voters have to present, to basically induce the European Commission to present a legislative initiative. That is like, to initiate a legislative process. 1 million signatures are needed, which, considering 28 member states is not that much. And on the other hand, these signatures have to come from at least 1/4 of the member states. Other points that are clearly stated in the Lisbon Treaty. First of all, the involvement of the civil society in the EU decision-making. Especially when it comes to the Commission, that is the initiator of the EU legislation, it is clearly stated that it has to take into consideration and to consult the European civil society. I will show you in a while a few attempts that were conducted before the Lisbon Treaty. Moreover, the Lisbon Treaty states that in the legislative process, both the Council and the Parliament, that is the two co-legislators, have to act publicly. That is, their debates have to be public and accessible. Another point is that the European Charter of Human Rights, the EU Charter of Rights, has been included finally in the treaties and made applicable and justiciable in front of the European Court of Justice. Moreover, a bigger role has been given to the national parliaments in terms of controls. On the one hand, they are automatically informed of what happens in the EU in terms of legislative process, and on the other hand, they have been given like powers of control when it comes to the subsidiarity principle. They can basically scrutiny the European legislation, and they can even veto the European legislation in some given cases. Now, going back to the European Parliament elections, what are the main problems that we might find and that we are faced with in the electoral process? Well, first of all, if you think of how the debates go on in your country, here in Estonia, in every member state, I would say. Well, first of all, the electoral programs, what basically is debated among the parties, are designed at national level, are designed by the national parties. Second, the debate and the vote itself is focused 90% of the time on national issues. You very rarely hear debates about Europe. And when you do it, it's mostly Europe with a national connotation. The list of candidates are defined by the national parties. Unless a party candidate is really somebody really embarrassing, well, then the European parties have no voice in that. Moreover, both in the eyes of the voters and in the eyes of the parties, these elections are perceived as second-order elections, in the sense like less relevant, simply because you do not vote, you do not elect a government. I mean, when you vote for national elections, you get a government out of that. In the European elections, you do not, but soon I will just show you that something has changed. And the last 2 points. On the one hand, voters are more likely to vote for protest parties, simply because, again, they do not see the link between voting in the European Parliament elections and voting for a government. So they do not see a direct outcome. On the other hand, they are likely to sanction the party that is in government, simply because, again, this would not imply bigger changes. It's just, a signal to the party. Now, looking at two cases that can be classified as soft changes. One, and that somehow touch very directly these current European elections. One is the definition of the European party programs, and the other one is the so-called presidentialization of the electoral campaign, especially with respect to the appointment of the President of the European Commission. So as you can see, one has to deal with the before-election phase, and the second one with the after-election phase. Okay, again, as I said, the best way, the only way that so far can be achieved is using Lisbon at best. That is basically to take out of the treaty, the most you can. And Article 17 of the treaty says how the President of the European Commission should be appointed. That is, taking into account the elections to the European Parliament, and after having held the appropriate consultation, the European Council, acting by a qualified majority, shall propose to the European Parliament a candidate for President of the Commission. So basically, what it says is simply, okay, we see which European party gets more votes, and then out of that party, we appoint somebody as the President of the European Commission. But the parties went quite a lot far away, I would say. Because every major European party selected a candidate as as potential president of the European Commission. In this way, the party that will get more vote, most likely one of these two, the Conservative European People's Party or the center-left Party of European Socialists, will express the president. And the president will be either Jean-Claude Juncker, and we already know that, or Martin Schulz. So we know that in case, which one will be the president. And interestingly, also parties that do not really have chances to get the plurality of the votes have conducting the same operation. That is, like the Greens presented Eva Keller, the Liberal Democrats, the former Belgian Prime Minister Van Rompuy, and the radical left, that is the party. What? Sorry. Guy Verhofstadt, sorry. And the European left presented like Tsipras, that is like the president of the Syriza party in Greece. It was quite active against the austerity. Now, again, this seems to reflect what the European citizens expect. I mean, this is like a survey taken in 2013, and as you can see, 70% of the European citizens, or at least of the respondents, favor the direct election of the President of the European Commission. Obviously, this is not a direct election, but at least citizens know what will be the outcome in terms of appointment of the President of the Commission. And why do you want to have the President of the European Commission elected? I mean, look at what are the main answers. EU's decision would seem more legitimate to Europeans. So, legitimation. It would reinforce democracy within the EU, so reducing the democratic deficit. It would reinforce your feeling of being a European citizen, awareness, and reducing the distance. It would reinforce the link between the EU and its citizens, again, bringing citizens closer to the EU. Now, what has been the response of the national parties? I mean, obviously, the national parties feel, the growing relevance, or at least the alleged growing relevance of the national parties as a challenge. And, on the one hand, somehow they accepted that willy-nilly, let's say. So on the one hand, what you witness is moderate acceptance. But that moderate acceptance, on the other hand, is reflected by quite low publicity. I mean, at national level, you rarely hear, debates concerning the potential candidates to the European Commission or the positions of the European parties. Therefore, what we witness is a limited Europeanization of the national programs. And an attempt to keep the election national, also because, obviously, if you manage to shift the focus at the European level, then the national parties will lose a number of arguments in the electoral campaign. And then what you witness is, on the other hand, in some contexts, a functional use of the European candidates and of the European programs. I come from Italy. I generally do not focus my presentations on Italy, and I have no intention to do so. But, as you know, or as you might expect, I mean, the political parties and the political context in Italy, it's quite delegitimized, given a number of scandals, corruption, and so on and so forth. So, it's not a case that almost all the Italian parties made a very good functional use of the European parties and of the European debate, I would say for mostly national, intents. I mean, these are I would say, four of the main national parties, and these are the logos that will compete for the European election. As you can see, in all these logos, there is a clear reference to the European campaign. The Democratic Party has basically a reference to the European Socialist Party. The Liberals have a clear reference to Guy Verhofstadt. The left has a reference to Tsipras, and so on and so forth.
Interfere. As you know, in Estonia, in reference to how Estonian Euro members of the parliament, do you know to which political parties do they belong? So, for example, Indrek Tarand. Anyone? Yes, the Green Party, right? So we have the candidates from the Reform Party and the Centre Party belong to the same group, the ALDE.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, the Liberals, yeah. Then we have the IRL, which belongs to the Conservatives.
Yes.
Yeah.
The EPP, European People's Party.
Exactly. And then we will be interested to find out where to a number of new candidates that have not applied through a party will be looking. But it seems that at least in Estonia also these names or ideologies are perhaps very little used.
Yeah.
And mostly it's talked about my own party stances rather than how I actually work in the European Parliament.
Yeah.
A very interesting side note is also, if you remember, a lot of our European MEPs actually stepped out of the party when they became European Party members, right? Meaning that they are there, but they don't even have a direct relation with the political party they were chosen by, which is something to think about. But go on.
Yeah, and if I may just, connect to what you said, it's 2 years that I'm in Estonia, so somehow I know what are the political dynamics. And if you think, for example, that exactly, the Reform Party and the Centre Party, which as far as I know do not love each other so much at national level, are part of the same European Party group. Well, that somehow tells you something. So how do these MEPs behave? What position do they take? And how do reconcile, the differences that they have at home with their common position at the European level? Of course, if that thing would be stressed too much, it might be used by their opponents, say, hey, they pretend to be so enemies at home, but then in the end they end up in the same party group in Europe. So, obviously. Okay, looking at this trend of presidentialization, so-called presidentialization of the European elections, what can we note? Well, first of all is that at least when it comes to the three main candidates, that is like Schulz, Juncker and Verhofstadt, all these three candidates based their political campaign on European electoral manifestos that were approved by party congresses, respectively in Dublin for the EPP, in Rome for the Social Democrats, and in Vienna for the Liberal Democrats. What we notice is, for the very first time, a quite strong personalization of the electoral campaign. These candidates are having transnational tour, let's say electoral tours or campaign. They are getting to different member states and, having speeches, so far not in squares, but at least in theaters or, conference centers and so on and so forth. Moreover, for the first time, there will be a political debate, wired on TV, among the 5 candidates. The first one will be on March 15th. So if you are interested, just follow it. But of course, even in that case, the problem is the publicity and the visibility. In the case of in that case, the debate will be held on Euronews. So of course, most of the national TVs will simply not show it. But I would say it's a start, and it seems to be a quite promising start. On the other hand, there are risks related to that. Okay, if the benefits are clearly visibility, the citizens start to realize that something is going on. Awareness, because of course if you have a face to reconnect to the vote, obviously you tend to be more aware. Mobilization and legitimacy, well then there is a risk. There is basically reducing the already small participatory spaces for the voters. And in that respect I will mention just an example that was conducted in 2009. The Party of the European Socialists approved in a very participatory way its manifesto in 2009 elections. The name of the manifesto was People First, a New Direction for Europe. It was developed via an online consultation, a very interactive portal that was open especially for that goal, involving 300,000 visitors, like meetings across Europe, and contributions from both formal and informal actors such as NGOs, trade unions, foundations, member parties, and individual citizens. This time, the manifesto, the electoral manifesto of the Social Democrats, as well as those of the other mainstream parties, was simply approved by, somehow involving in the debate the member parties, and with a much lower level of involvement of the civil society and of the citizens. So, if on the one hand you give a face to the party in terms of candidate, on the other hand there seems to be a decline in terms of involvement of the citizenry in the development of the electoral basis. To conclude, I want to mention just one example that was conducted in the late, basically in 2007, 8, and 11, and that had the very objective to involve the civil society in the deliberative process of the EU. This is the case of Agora. How many of you heard of that? Okay. Well, I would say quite good, because generally, basically, yeah. And this clearly denotes one of the problems of Agora. So, as you probably know, after the rejection of the European Constitutional Treaty, the European Commission launched a plan called Plan D, Democracy, Dialogue and Debate. And the main, one of the aims, the three aims of the Plan D was, like, on the one hand, to strengthen the electoral link between elected and voters. The second one was to give some rights of scrutiny to the national parliament, and the third one was actually favoring the citizens' involvement at some level in the European Parliament deliberation. That is, to involve the citizenry in the debate and in the deliberation of the European Parliament. As a result, the Parliament, with the support of the other European institutions, launched this Agora as an attempt to involve citizens in a permanent dialogue. That was exactly the definition given by the Parliament. Not just to communicate with the citizens, but to genuinely listen to them through a concerted and balanced dialogue. So the idea, according to what was said by the Parliament and was, was defined in the official documents, was to involve citizens as the voice, the real voice of, the European people, and to make them part of the deliberative process. Now, 3 sessions of Agora were held, 2007, 8, and 11. On the other hand, what you will see is that instead of citizens, those who were involved were associations, NGOs, or anyway, expressions of the civil society. I'm not saying that, that is, let's say, a secondary goal or less relevant, but simply, from the description, I mean, what was claimed was a reference to direct democracy. Even they mentioned Athenian direct democracy, and the goals were very ambitious. Among the others, to involve the citizens and the civil society in the approval process of the Lisbon Treaty. And the European Parliament wanted the opinion of the civil society when it comes to when it came to the Lisbon Treaty and the institutional process before saying a yes or a no. Well, let's say a no would have been quite unlikely. But yeah, before expressing an opinion. So the 3 agoras, the first one was indeed on the future of Europe. That is, like, on the reform of the institutional framework of the EU. The second one, held in 2008, was on climate change, and the third, held in 2011, on the crisis and forms of poverty. They were divided into workshops, 5 workshops for the first 2 and 3 for the third. And the participants slightly changed because at the beginning, in the first one, they were around 300, and then in the second and third experience, around 500. Now, how were the citizens, the organizations participating chosen? Well, they were chosen mostly by the EP committees involved in the different issues at stake, and the lists were somehow perfectioned by individual MEPs with their individual contributions. Basically, in none of the occasions, a clear selection method was, provided. And on the other hand, what you could notice that among the participants, there was a clear preponderance of pro-European organizations like Young Federalists, Cafe Babel, or I don't know, Movement for European Movement, and so on and so forth. Now, looking at here, basically, I tried to evaluate these experiences in the light of 5 criteria and through 3 phases. I mean, the phases are the preliminary phase, that is like, simply, setting up the agora, this arena for public debate, for open debate, that should have contributed to the deliberative process of the European Parliament. The second one is the debate as such, and the third one is the results of the agora and the impact that it had on the deliberation. So, in the preliminary phase, I evaluate inclusiveness and transparency. And I gave, red dots when there is a serious problem, yellow dot when, things are quite, I would say, problematic, but still with a positive potential, and green when, the result is satisfactory. As you can see, there are only 4 green satisfactory results. Okay, when it comes to the selection of participants based on clear rules and criteria, obviously there was no clear rules and criteria. I mean, simply saying that they reflected the general state of things and the general state of the debate in Europe. Fair representation of different groups and opinions. Again, looking at the list, you could see basically, a preponderance of some organizations, that, by the way, were chairing most of the workshops, and simply no clear criteria for the selection of the participants. Same thing with respect to the rapporteur, because of course the rapporteur was reflecting the imbalance that you could find in the misrepresentation of the different groups. When it comes, on the other hand, to information and publicity by the press, it was like, the Parliament was quite active in this preliminary phase to publicize this initiative, and the website was quite, well done and efficiently designed. But what's the problem in the preliminary phase? I mean, if simply you are not, basically, the selection process of the participant is not transparent, and the representation is not, let's say, fair and balanced, well, this obviously affects all the deliberative process. So, looking at the debate as such, I focused on inclusiveness and transparency. So, quality of the debates. The debates were mostly participatory and deliberative, in the sense that, voice was given to everybody, and, somehow with quite, well-defined rules. On the other hand, given the imbalance in terms of representation and the not clear criteria in terms of selection of the participants, that obviously affected the result of the deliberation as such. And obviously in terms of equal opportunities. The moderators were quite neutral, even if, of course, most of them were coming from, pro-European environments or pro-European organizations, and debating about, controversial issues, somehow they appeared moderately unbalanced, but I would say that not too much. And this, of course, affected the quality of the final document. But when it comes to the results, that's the most interesting point. I mean, finally, okay, in the first phase, you have the group of participants that should give their contribution in the deliberative process. In the second phase, there is this deliberative process in which, the participants express their opinion and present some results in the form of documents. By the way, were quite clear documents because they were by dots, simply. Now, what's the impact? What's the actual result in terms of affecting the deliberation process of the European Parliament? Well, I would say that in that respect, the picture is quite discomforting. And here I would look at impact, coverage, transparency, and legitimacy. Okay, on the one hand, did the institution take into account the results? Well, I wouldn't say so much. And let me just mention the first case, the first case of the Agora on the institutional reform of the European Union. Well, basically, first of all, the Parliament ratified the Lisbon Treaty before the end of the Agora. And on the other hand, in the official final document of the European Parliament in which it approves the Lisbon Treaty, there is not a single reference to the Agora or to the results of the Agora. And I would say that this first case reflects more or less, the other cases. And a number of associations that participated in the process actually stressed that in their feedback, saying that, in the end, there was no real impact of the deliberation on the legislative process. And when it comes to coverage well, while in the first phase there was a quite strong promotion of the coverage for the medias and for the press by the European Parliament and the European institutions, then I would say that in the last phase, that is in the phase in which the impact could have been judged and evaluated, well, in that case, simply, the involvement of the medias and of the civil society beyond the one involved in the deliberations was quite low. So the point is that I would say that in the case of Agora, the picture is quite grayish. In the sense, okay, the attempt was obviously a noble one to reconnect civil society, if not citizens, but at least civil society, representative of civil society, to the European Union. But in terms of results, well, I think that can be taken as an example of many things to change.
I guess the good example or a comparison could be made with Rahvakogu, which of course was a bit more about citizens as it was organized by the civil society, but perhaps also a very important event in terms of direct democracy and increasing legitimacy of citizens. But I wanted to ask you, as we've heard quite a lot of scary statistics, right? And I think
anyway,
we all.
I'm done with that.
Yeah. So, but I guess. Considering myself as a Euro optimist, if one can be, if you look at the situation in the world, in the whole world, and we know that already the trust against or towards institutions is increasing almost everywhere, right? Yeah. Every democratic political system, not to mention autocratic or totalitarian political systems, face more and more issues with people feeling they're being left out, they don't trust the government, they might trust police, but we don't basically like the leaders we ourselves have elected. So in those terms, looking at America, Australia, and considering the state that the European Union is in comparison, how well is EU doing with other countries?
Well, I would say that yes, if you look at other contexts, the picture might be, is a bit more, optimistic. However, I would say that there is a big difference. The fact is that we don't know what the EU is, but we know what the US, Australia, Brazil or other countries are. They are states, and citizens know what states are. So they know that, there is a prime minister who is elected, and, if you have problems with the prime minister, then the problem is him, his government, and potentially his party, or with the parliament. But anyway, you have an objective of your dissatisfaction. Now, the thing is that so far in Europe, basically citizens do not really know what EU is. And this really reconnects to the very first point that I made. I mean, they do not know where decisions are taken. Simply because sometimes, even their governments have no interest to say that. Often the governments say, Europe asks us to do so, and then they just agreed about something in the European Council. Or like, for example, simply decisions, pass so many levels that simply citizens are not able to see, who are the actors in every level. And Barroso once said an interesting thing. The European governments cannot ask to their citizens to be pro-European on Sunday if they spend time from Monday to Saturday to blame Europe.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I guess perhaps a thing to think about is, considering all of the issues and challenges that we have, the fact that the EU is moving towards more registered lobby, the fact that, as I understand, the number of civil society organizations focused on lobby, in addition to businesses focusing on lobby, is pretty high in comparison, for example, to the United States, where corporate interests
and more
obviously...
transparent.
Exactly. In terms of Agora, I believe it's also a very good example of where if you compare it to the American political system, where citizens do know what is going on, but still there is a very large amount of people who are very disenfranchised, not asked their opinion about, and according to the latest developments, maybe not even allowed to vote because of the legislation pushed through by the Republican Party. So in the same way, while we are doing badly, one might say, we might still be the best example of a strange democracy at work, but because we have another level, it makes everything so complicated.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. So we are moving on, as the Europe probably is desperately calling us already. But I will ask Maria to maybe start the technical preparations. But I will still, at the same time, give the chance for the audience to maybe ask a few questions from Stefano about his insight. And then I'm going to give the microphone to you so that the questions could at the same time be translated.
Thank you for the vivid speech. My name is Ander Alas, and my question comes from what you basically end with the moderator between. As we can see, what is the issue today of the European Union as truly is a nationalism. European Union is not as a federalist entity, and therefore many issues reflect from the positions what you are able to take as pro-European or pro-nationalist. So my question comes as, could we see somehow a success in threshold of going in general view from nationalistic member states into somehow federalist phases or feelings of grasping in the future a more common Europe?
You mean the governments? Yeah. Well, okay, on the one hand, I would say that, the age of federalism used to be probably in the 50s or in the 60s. I would say of pure federalism. In the sense that, if I should tell, for example, to my students, when there was a real possibility to create a European federation, defined as a federation, and, something very close to what we used to be called United States of Europe, well, that was in the 50s. Or in the 60s. Simply because these governments were pretty clear what was the war, what were the damages of the war. They had a pretty clear vision and similar vision and similar federalist, attitudes. I guess that, that window of opportunity simply closed when first de Gaulle went to power, and second, definitively, when, UK joined the Union. So, in terms of traditional federalism, I wouldn't say that, we are going towards that. On the other hand, I would say that in terms of, pragmatic federalist solutions, there might be a windows of opportunity. And we know that simply Europe acts when there are needs. And today we have a number of needs, not last the crisis, for example. And we know that basically there are two ways of, going out of a crisis, be it economic, identity crisis, legitimation crisis, and so far the EU is facing all these three, by the way. So the ways are either going back to national capitals, but we know what this determined in the past, or simply find practical solutions in order to overcome the problems. And in this case, the solutions have to be of a federalist nature, in the sense giving more power to the common institutions. That is, for example, the debate when it comes to the control of the financial, the spending of the member states, creating the fiscal union, these kind of things. I mean, these go in the direction of a federalist approach. I mean, obviously, the outcome might not be, a fully fledged federation, but would be something, more integrated. That's the.
I guess at least when we did the new Pact for Europe discussion in Estonia, it was very interesting that while most Estonians support Federalist Europe, most Estonians would not agree, for example, to give up their foreign policy veto right, as we are very afraid, which is very interesting, as I often find that we want the Europe to defend us and we want Europe to be more integrated. However, when our own decisions go into threat, we say, no, too much.
But that's a big problem with federation, of course.
Yes, it is. Other reactions, thoughts, questions? Yes, Mal.
My question is that did you attend this process of Agora yourself, or
No,
you just have a
no.
description of others?
No. I didn't have a description. Basically, I went through the documents and I basically analyzed. But no, I don't have a first-hand.
Just my comment.
Yeah,
that
please.
I wouldn't take it as this example as a good example of involvement. It was very formal.
Yeah. So it was very
and
formal.
it was kind of one-time attempt. Nothing. There was no follow-up.
Yeah.
There was. I think it was a kind of project of one member of the parliament, Mr. Lambert.
Yeah. Well,
and
yes,
maybe others.
A prominent one.
And this was really not a good example. I wouldn't like to repeat it again, because I remember how our people were invited to this event. They didn't have any background information. There were just, long celebrity speeches, and this shouldn't be an example of a direct democracy. We should really work on more substantial formats and models. It's just a comment.
Yeah, and if I may say, because that's, I found that quite problematic. For the first Agora experience, you had a formal list of participants, which is the very basic thing that you would, expect. But for the second or the third, the only thing you could find were kind of, informal scanned documents somewhere, in the web. But simply in the website, there was no list, formal list of the participants. So if you cannot even have a formal list of the participants, I think that, things are.
Well, I was a moderator at Rahvakogu, which of course has also gotten very mixed reviews in Estonian politics about whether it had a good impact or whether it just helped to negate the protests that were needed. However, at least my opinion on Rahvakogu, seeing how it was conducted, was very transparent, that everything was online. Perhaps so many people didn't show up as they asked, but at least all of the things were done very well. So maybe we can suggest to send Urmo Kübar to Europe for some time to tell them how to improve Agora a bit better.
If there would be a new one, because of course now so
Yes.
far nobody knows.
All right, so I as we have to move on, as Europe will be calling to us, I feel like a Eurovision host now, as they will be saying their points. We will have about a 5-minute coffee break, where you can have coffee, tea, and cookies outside, just because Maria is dealing with all the technical issues, and we don't want you to sit here embarrassed, waiting for the technology to catch up with us. So a 5-minute coffee break või siis 5-minutiline kohvipaus küpsistega väljas, koos siis tee, kohvi ja veega. Võite muidugi ka siin ilusasti istuda ja olla, aga et siis jätkame 5 minuti pärast juba siis kogemustega teistest Euroopa Liidu riikidest, kuidas siis seal kaasamisega on. Ja kes tahab veel Stefanoga diskuteerida, Stefano, I understand you will be staying here. Yes, et siis te saate seda teha hiljem ja samamoodi ka kohvipausi ajal talle väga viisakalt läheneda ja võib-olla veel mõnda peegeldust pakkuda. Aitäh!
I?
Great.
Okay, I can feel it too.
So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Everyone's online, even those who are not considered.
Okay.
So I think I will start. Is it okay?
Yes. You'll tell me when to start, right?
Yeah, I will take it.
nüüd see hetk, kus ma teen ise personaalselt neid tun-tun-tun, etendus hakkab järgmise siis paari minuti jooksul. Et veel saab neid maitsvaid küpsiseid. Katrin näiteks eriti soovitas küpsiseid müsli ja seemnetega ja valge šokolaadiga. Ma mõtlesin veel korra, jätkan seda tehnilist kontrolli. Hello, so I am just checking. Can you hear me well? All right. Yes, I can see you are saying something, but we have switched off the sound, which is something that is not wise when we want to hear what you have to say. So once again, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear us?
All right, great. So that was Alina from Romania, and we have a second speaker as well, Neda. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me well?
Excellent. This is like the amateur European Eurovision, as I said. Yeah. I spoke French. We could. All right. So I will not be standing here the whole time. So I will only come when I ask questions or either leave or go. So today, as you can see from down there, we have visitors, and the first visitor is from Romania, and this is Alina, who is from National Association of Citizens Advice Bureau, very fancy, and she will have a word for about 10 minutes to speak about good practices from all over Europe, but how actually citizen involvement works. Ehk siis esimene esineja, meil on siis Alina Rumeeniast, kes saab siis järgmise umbes 10 minuti jooksul rääkidagi sellest, missugune on nende siis vabaühenduse kogemus hea kaasamise praktika ja parimate näidete kohta. Ja samuti on meil siis võimalus küsida Alinalt ka mõne küsimuse, kui see meile pähe tuleb. Nii et nende sõnadega, with those words, Alina, the floor, or where basically the camera, is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Yes, indeed, I would like to talk a bit about the Romanian example as regards the participation in the 2009 European elections. And the reason I have chosen this topic is not only the topic given by the topic of the debate, but also because in our perspective, the right to vote and stand as a candidate for the European elections can be called the pearl of the crown in terms of EU-level participation tools. However, when thinking about the topic of the discussion today and thinking about the means that the citizens can use to influence the decision-making process at the EU level, we've come to the conclusion that unfortunately the right to vote and stand for the EU elections, even though it is widely known, it has not been used to the same extent throughout at the time, and it's well known the fact that we can notice a certain disenchantment with the usage of the right to vote. The 2009 elections being an example of a situation where the voter turnout was among the lowest in the EU and at the country level as well, of course. So when looking at the right to vote, I thought that this year being an electoral year as well, and us at the National Association of Citizens Advice Bureau also being on the verge of launching our very own Go to Vote campaign for the European elections, we thought of looking at how things were in terms of voter turnout for the 2009 elections in Romania, and of finding some explanations for these. because as I was saying, we noticed a decrease in terms of percentages of people going to vote in 2009 as compared to the 2007 elections in Romania, that Romania accessed the EU, because in 2007 there were the voter turnout was of 29%, whereas in 2009 it decreased by a bit more than 2%, around 2 percentage points, and it was around 27.6%. However, in comparison to an EU average of 43%, this was rather low, and Romania is considered to be one of the countries at the bottom of the rank in terms of participation in the EU elections, unfortunately. So here comes the explanation part, because as I was saying, we were thinking which could be the explanations for these low numbers. When we look at the numbers, we always try to find out explanations. And of course, the ones that were provided in the presentation before, in the very encompassing and interesting presentation, are very much applicable to the Romanian case as well. Besides those, what I would add is the history of the Eastern countries in Europe, because if we look at the ranks in terms of participation in the elections, we can notice that the countries in the eastern part of Europe were actually those that where the voter turnout for the 2009 elections were lower, which means were below 33%. And here some explanations can regard maybe the background of these ex-communist countries and their economic situation as compared to the rest of the EU. However, a question that stands always is the visibility of the European Parliament as an institution when compared to the other, to the national institutions and to the national parliament. Because in the literature, it can be observed that the European Parliament is seen for certain countries as being secondary to the national parliament, and of course the attention goes less towards the elections for the European Parliament. And for the 2009 elections, we can see this situation happening for more countries of the EU. It was not only the case of Romania, but there was also the case of Germany, of Greece, and of Portugal. So this can also be one explanation. However, if focusing on the case of Romania, the main points that I would like to make regard the discourse, the European discourse that took place in Romania in the period prior to the 2009 elections, and of course the campaign that was attached to it. And the reason why I wanted to focus on these aspects regards the fact that we can always learn from the lessons of the past, and as I was mentioning, that we are also in the phase of developing our very own Go to Vote campaign. I think that it will also be a lesson for us, the civil society organizations, to know what to look at when analyzing the political discourse in terms of electoral campaign for the European elections, the elections for the European Parliament. So going back to the topic at hand, in Romania, the 2009 elections came in a rather interesting landscape, because they actually followed the elections for the National Parliament, which took place in November 2008, and preceded the elections for the presidential seat in Romania, which took place in December 2009. So they were somewhere in between two very important elections taking place in Romania. And this was something that was actually being noted and obvious in terms of political discourse as well, because the discourse regarding the national, the aspects that could be solved at the national level was preemptive, meaning that in Romania somehow the focus was more on the presidential campaign and on the launching of the candidates for the presidential elections in December than on the electoral campaigns for the European Parliament per se. And this is something that has also been noted in previous studies. But when looking at the political landscape, to start with this, in Romania we have several important political parties, but the most visible ones in terms of their candidacy for the European Parliament were the Social Democratic Party, the Liberal Democratic Party, the Democratic Union of the Hungarians in Romania, the Greater Romania Party, which is the Nationalist Party, and the National Liberal Party. All these parties competed for the 33 seats that Romania had allocated in the European Parliament for the 2009-2014 mandate. But in terms of their discourse, I want to stress again that during the electoral campaigns, this was focused on national issues, meaning that even when launching the electoral campaign, none of the parties had a European agenda to put forward, to bring forward to the citizens, and they mainly focused either on having negative campaigns against the other candidates or the other political parties, or on taking over the role as the saviors of future Romania. And this is very obvious when looking, and I must admit now that I was taking a bit of joy when looking back at the slogans and the messages that the political parties used in Romania for the 2009 elections, because even from these it is obvious that the campaign was actually as a forefront for the campaign for the presidential elections. And in
just for a moment, I completely agree. I think that's a problem with almost every European election that we have seen in almost every member state. But do you think that the election turnouts might have been higher, or that somehow the process would have been more exciting if they focused on European issues? Or are perhaps European issues, to put it bluntly, so boring that it actually wouldn't help?
Well, yeah, if we look at the data regarding the knowledge that the Romanians have on EU issues, then unfortunately this leads to rather complicated conclusion, to call them like these, because on the one hand you have situations where in the Eurobarometers, and I think this is the case Europe-wise, you have cases when in the Eurobarometers the respondents answer that they do know their rights, but when compared with specific rights, then the knowledge is not that high anymore. Plus that you also have the aspect that was previously mentioned as well, the distance from the EU institutions. And the reason I'm mentioning this to give you the answer is that should the campaign have been more focused on EU aspects, I think that yes, maybe it would have been a premise for a higher voter turnout. But at the same time, I think that a campaign based on EU, on European program should be completed by information campaigns developed by other actors regarding the results of the citizens' vote, because even the results in 2009 for the Romanian elections showed that the candidates that took the seats in the parliament were actually pretty visible in the political landscape. Generally speaking, and in the end, the way that the election process is developed is also something that needs a more profound look, to say it like this.
All right, thank you. So as I understand, even if European matters might seem a bit more boring to us, or to some citizens, it actually benefits us when we talk about them, even though they might not excite us to a level that a cup of coffee might. All right, just as a last question, as we are moving on to Croatia, Alina, is there perhaps something very good that you think you might point out from Romania as an example for Estonians to ponder about? Is there a particularly good way that you have been able to somehow involve citizens, a good practice, a good communication that comes to your mind?
If I have to think strictly about the means of communication between the members of the European Parliament and the citizens, unfortunately, my answer would be a negative one. But if I think about the involvement of the civil society organizations, I think that a concerted effort is again the answer, and that as long as there is a good communication between the actors taking on the roles of informing the citizens, then the results can be good. And to put it even more direct, I think that I could answer very well your question at the end of this year, when I hope that we will see better results for the participation in the elections for the European Parliament.
All right, I see you're also an optimist. Thank you very much, Alina. We will now be moving on, as we are already a bit late, to moving on to the next participant. Thank you, Alina. And if you will stay in the line for maybe some questions in the end. We, with this, move on to the second, one of the newest member states of the European Union, Croatia. And we'll speak to Neda from Sensor Plus about what is happening in Croatia. And if possible, Neda, I would like you to focus maybe just a little on the dynamics of the problems, as we have had so many discussions on the problems already, and if possible, on maybe a few solutions or sort of constructive ideas that you think can be taken from your experience with European elections and inclusiveness. So you also now have the camera.
Thank you very much on your introduction. So, as you already said, I'm Neda, coming from Association for Promotion of Human Rights and Media Freedoms, Cenzura Plus, from Split, Croatia. And Croatia has just become a member state less than a year ago. And now, for the first time, we are participating together with other EU countries in the election for the members of the European Parliament. So I will just shortly go through the last year's elections in Croatia, and then we'll focus on citizens' participation in election processes, challenges that we are dealing with as a new member state, but also we'll give a few recommendations for Croatia in that context. I hope that my organization and I also will learn more from other participating countries, for partnership organizations from EU member states, on how to facilitate citizens' participation and their communication with MIPs through this debate. And I'm really glad to be part of it. So if we look last year's elections in Croatia that were held for the first time, only 20.84% of people voted. What is the worst turnout in the elections so far in Croatia? As Alina mentioned, on the EU level, average turnout was 43%.
So you are now talking about European Parliament elections or national elections?
I'm talking about elections for the European Parliament that we had last year,
for the first time.
Before Croatia became EU member state, less than a year.
Thanks. Go on.
If we think about the low level and interest for voting, how could it be explained? I think that there is a lack of information on the role of the European Parliament and responsibilities of MIPs, as those are new institutions and maybe positions for Croats that need to be discussed more in public, but also a low level of trust to national and EU institutions also, and this information in public that 12 Croatian MIPs that Croatia currently has, that they can't do anything if we compare the number of MIPs that have other EU countries maybe. Unfortunately, there is a lack of information on generally on how European Parliament functions, not only from media institutions, but also from members of the European Parliament from Croatia and current candidates for MIPs. Just to mention, before the first Croatian elections last year, the focus of public interest were wages and discriminatory messages of some candidates, and it is necessary to have a meaningful discussion about relevant issues on the competence of the European Parliament and to our elected members in relation to the policies, what are their concrete responsibilities, and how citizens could interact with them. But as this year campaign is going forward, again, only national issues have been debated, mostly between two biggest political parties in Croatia. So people do not have that feeling that something will change and they could influence it. I have to mention that there are no relevant information, reports and studies till now in Croatia in this really short period, less than a year, on the participation and the citizens' MIPs communication. So I will give an overview of the situation in Croatia and our experience, as we are together with the Office of the European Parliament in Croatia doing some local-oriented campaign on these elections, and I will include at the end some recommendations in that context. So the perception of the European Parliament in the eyes of citizens in Croatia is like large bureaucratic apparatus which boils down to negotiation among national leaders, hidden from the general public, as well as the institution that sets certain conditions for citizens, either in fisheries, agriculture, finances, and their reports are rated and taken in consideration as explicit decree that no one can complain or affect, nor any of the politicians has interest to do so, and citizens don't even know how they can affect some decisions or policies of the European Parliament. There are some informations in public that about 70% of all national legislation is related to the European legislation, and that EU discusses on how our money is spent from the EU budget across the board, but people are still being passive and do not find important their role. So people need to have information that MIPs have to inform them and communicate it with them on daily basis for issues that are directly concerning citizens. In Croatia, between cycles from last year 2013 and this year 2000, that our MIPs haven't been in great communication with citizens. They didn't succeed. Citizens.
Just a moment, Nina. I think we are not hearing you very well.
Sorry, can you hear me now better?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, just to repeat that before these two cycles of elections, we can say that our MIPs haven't been in great communication with citizens. They did not succeed to mobilize citizens on discussion on the EU that we want to live in, and they did not put people on first place. It was short time, less than a year, but anyway, national political parties and only themes relevant for Croatian level and national politics are discussed. They continue to act as an extension of their political parties in Croatia, and even while reporting about their work within the European Parliament, it was discussed in the context of political success of national party in Croatia. want to only mention that new media are not used within MIPs and candidates for MIPs. Just few of them have been in another city, except capital city, or their own hometown and communicated with people. So these are the bad examples and how not things should be done. So at the end, I want to give you some recommendations for Croatia, but also what is important to learn from other EU countries about the main challenges that they deal with and how to facilitate citizens' participation in their communication with MIPs. As Croatia is a young democratic state, we are learning why this is important communication between MIPs and citizens. So think on MIPs maybe like an experts and experienced people in some fields of work, not necessarily that their most successful political career based on the work in political party, but to seek people who will advocate for the same policies as citizens are advocating also. The scope of work and the importance of the European Parliament generally needs to be communicated more at all levels in Croatia, not only at capital city, to which gravitates about 20% or more of population in Croatia, but also in another cities across Croatia that MIPs should visit and discuss about EU policies. We all have to take time to inform the general public about the EU competencies and what the European Parliament effectively does. Citizens do not know how to affect EU policies, and they are not informed even on the European Citizens Initiative or other tools and mechanisms in Croatia, how to participate in decision-making processes. And a few recommendations for MIPs in Croatia. They should become better at communicating with citizens, or at least communicating better what already exists. They have to make sure that citizens get the right information and report back about their activities and and discuss with citizens about their expectations. Also important is that civil society organizations need to engage more, as they are on daily basis communicating with citizens, maybe by drafting recommendations directed to MIPs and to encourage citizens to become multipliers towards other citizens on the issues. And what is also important, that social media needs to be used more in Croatia, as they are important as they give ability to establish personal contacts from MIPs and with voters, but also at the same time they make individuals to feel their online presence and to see their active vote can be heard. So just at the end, I want to provide you with the information that we are, as Association Cenzura Plus, are organizing local events in the South Croatia region, Dalmatia. Some of them in cooperation with the Office for Informing of the European Parliament in Croatia, and direct contact with citizens on the street is the best possible way to have campaign and to have direct feedback from citizens themselves and to see what methodology should be used in future. For us, for this just only 1 year that we have MIPs from Croatia, that was the best experience till now. So we'll see how our impact on the outcome of the European elections very soon was. So that's it for now. Many thanks on your time, and if someone will have any questions now or later, please be free to ask. I'm looking forward to hear other experience from experienced EU countries and other EU countries.
Thank you very much, Neda, for your contribution. Just as a reference about Estonia, I did a bit of a background check during the time you were speaking. In Estonia, when we became members of the European Union, our voting activity was 46%. In the European Parliament election, so we're doing better than Croatia, which is not to say that we are happy about this, but it at least puts things into perspective. that things could be worse. And second thing, as we remember, you talked more about how, or important thing about Neda's presentation was also having more candidates that actually speak about issues that are important to citizens. Then perhaps a good example of this in Estonian context would be Indrek Tarand, who spoke against cartel parties during previous EU elections and actually was voted in. However, a question to you guys was, how much do you remember about Indrek Tarand speaking about European issues in these elections? Did he? Not really, right? So I guess if we talk about, and just as an information to you guys as well, Estonia now has a huge number of citizens running in elections who don't belong to any parties, and I guess this is something that we will write to them about, to actually speak about European issues rather than about how cool they are, just as people in Estonian politics. All right, with those remarks, does anyone have any questions for Neda before we move on? No. Estonians are sometimes quiet, yes. We move on, and we move on to a country with a lot of practice in EU. And this is country, the Netherlands, and we have ATRIA, the Institute on Gender Equality and Women's History. And from here we have, and I hope I pronounced this right, Willemien. And as I understand, she will be talking about the Dutch experience. Willemien, are you there? So I was switching. So this is Rosella. Yes. Can you hear us, Willemien? All right. Well, it seems for some reason we can't hear you. Could you please unmute your microphone? Yes. Or switch on your microphone. No. Yeah. Still can't hear you. As I understand, your earphones contain a microphone. So if you could plug in the microphone part of the earphone plugs. Yes. I also freelance as a technology advisor. I still can't hear you, I'm sorry. Yes. And you can also maybe check the settings if you've switched off your microphone to be polite, but now you can switch it on again. But one mustn't worry, technical difficulties are part of every conference. All right, so...
Do you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we have a voice. Excellent. All right, Willemien, is it you?
Yes, this is me.
Great.
Hello.
So,
hello.
Hello. This is Estonia calling. We are not giving any Eurovision points today, but we are giving you 10 minutes, about 10 minutes, to speak about the Dutch experience when it comes to European elections and involvement of citizens. So the camera is yours, and the Estonians in the hall are waving at you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And well, my name is Willemien, and I'm here on behalf of ATRIA, that is a Dutch gender center about history and about politics. And as you know, the Netherlands are one of the 6 founders of the European Union, and that was in 1956. And when I started last week to try to answer your question, and your question was how to make maps talk to citizens. And I really don't know the answer on that question, so then it should be a short presentation. So I changed the subject, how to make citizens talk to maps, and how to make maps listen to citizens. I think that is much more important. And I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I don't know how we can see that now. There it is. We are going now to the PowerPoint. I hope you can, yeah, you can see it. So I changed the the question. But what I think is when you want to talk about Europe, you first have to think about what kind of Europe. Is it a Europe from bottom up or from top down? Is it a Europe of unification or diversity? If you see at all the flags, at this moment we have a Europe of diversity. And, well, of course we have the European flag, but it's not used that much. And if we look to the Netherlands, there are political parties in the Netherlands, and they say we want out of Europe, we don't want to be a member anymore, we don't want to have the euro, and there are other parties, we want to stay in and it's very important, but they don't, nor those who want to go out or the parties who want to stay in make clear what kind of Europe they think about. You can, I will not go very deep into this, but there are 4 models you can think about. The Great Europe is top down and is unified, or a top down and a network of nations. You can have a bottom up Europe, and unified is a union of communities, and if you look to the diversity you can call it a network, a European Spring network. I will show you this this slide because I will recommend to everybody who's interested in what kind of Europe are we going to, go to this link from NESE, the Networking European Citizenship Education. They have made those 4 models, and before starting talking about Europe, you have to define what kind of Europe are we speaking of. If you want, I can show this Earl later to you. Well, communication between maps and citizens. I did a lot of projects the last years, and well, this project now is mainly an online project, but to be honest, a face-to-face project works much better. Then you can invite members of parliament in your conference room and talk face-to-face to them. Of course, the topic of the debate is also very important, and later on in this presentation I will go to the topic gender. Another thing is, do you work national or transnational? Well, if you are going to talk about Europe, forget the national debate. It's not very interesting. Always go to the transnational debate. Then another question you have to ask yourself, what is better? To do it in different languages, multilingual, and I will advise don't do that, stick to the English. But if you are having a project or want to communicate, then be sure that you have different it's a multicultural project. And the 5th thing is think about the impact of the project. If it has less impact, then you will not have the interest nor from the citizens nor from the members of parliament. So I put that in bold, so my personal, on my experience, what you have to do. Then I pick one topic about it. I could have chosen other topics. For instance, if we think now about the problem in the Ukraine, for the Netherlands, it's we follow it and we think it's important and we look what Mr. Putin is doing, but we realize that for instance, the Baltic states, it's quite an other situation, because you can compare yourself with what's going on in the Ukraine, and that's for the Netherlands not the case. So, but I want to focus on the gender question. In the 70s, the European Union was very active on legislation. And you could see then that in all the 6 member states at that period, just imagine now we have 28, in that period we have 6 member states. In all those member states, the civil society was very much involved what was going on gender legislation. It was important. People knew that if there came good legislation on equal pay for the same work, on social security, it could really change their lives. So if you have a subject where the people know that if there comes legislation, if there comes policy about it, and it will change their lives, then they will be involved. In the second period, you can maybe say that it had started from the 80s until 2005. In the European Union, they were still working on legislation, but they also had on the gender subject action programs. And in those action programs there was quite a lot of money for NGOs. There were settled thematic networks all over Europe, a growing Europe. There were conferences, education, etc. And also in that period, people knew what they were talking about. It was important in their own lives. Well, there was money for their work, very important, of course. And there was a lot to do on the gender equality, so we could interest civil society for the European Union, and the members of parliament wanted to listen to the problems in the member states, because the members of parliament had to work further on the legislation and the policy. Then I go to the third period. Well, maybe it started around 2000 until 2010. Then the process of legislation stopped. There was a strategy on gender equality, there were roadmaps, but no more legislation. And what we saw then, that both citizens and the members of parliament were not anymore very interested in each other. There were no real goals, there were no good proposals from the Commission, so what to talk about. And you can see then, well, at least in the Netherlands, but also in other member states, if we had the conference, well, nobody showed up. But that changed a little bit about 4 or 5 years ago. We managed to have a European Institute on Gender Equality, and that is based in Vilnius, in one of the Baltic states. It's called uued, and what they did was bring people again together about important gender subjects. And very lucky now, the chairs are filled up, not only with citizens, but also the members of parliament want to listen to what citizens want on this subject. Maybe you can go after this debate to the website of uued, but here you can see the main subjects where they are busy with, the Beijing Platform for Action. Well, you can read the rest, but I want to say one thing about the Beijing Platform for Action. As you know that every half year there is another member state, the chairperson of the European Union. And then gender is always a subject for that member state. And they choose one of the subjects out of the Beijing Platform for Action and ask UIED to make a report on that thing. So then every country can have one thing was interesting on the gender issue, but it's not interesting only for that member state, but for the whole European Union. UIED has also a very good resource and documentation center. There you can find there a lot of documents, and what we see is that more and more people really want to know about domestic violence, about gender stereotypes. It starts again that people realize that the European Union can help them to do something about these subjects. The future. Here you see which countries are in the future the chairperson of the European Union, and Italy is at the second part of this year, and in this project Italy is also involved. So Italy, please make sure that your country as well do something together with the people and the members of parliament about gender. We in the Netherlands are in 2016, the first part, and already now we are in contact with our government to put the agenda for the Netherlands on a lot of issues, but for sure gender as well. Well, I'm rounding up. If you are going to talk with citizens or with members of parliament, first make sure if you talk about Europe, what Europe. If you want to have a good communication, make sure it's a lot face-to-face, it's transnational, and take a concrete and interesting political subject. Know your own history, but also look into the future. My last remark, talking and listening are of course okay, but maybe the last sentence is the most important one. Tweets are good, social media are good, but directives are much better. Well, I think that's my contribution now, for now, and of course I also want to answer questions.
I think you gave us very good specific ideas about how to improve our own political discussion on European elections. Does anyone have questions for... You can't hear us? No? Well, I definitely switched on the microphone, so... let me see... can you hear me now? No? All right. All right, so I hope you can hear us as we have to move on. So a few things to take from here, considering that Estonia has one of the highest gender gaps, pay gaps in Europe, as we know. This will be something that the Estonian government might want to take in as a topic for 2018, but we'll see. Also, are there among you those who will be organizing a European election campaign or a political event for this election period? I am. Is any one of you? You are? The Open Estonia Foundation is, right? So let's remember all of those remarks given by Wilhelmine. And now we move on to the next country, and this is the country of Italy. And we have Mariano. Hello, Mariano. I will be switching to you.
Hello, everybody. Do you hear me?
And you have the floor for next 10 minutes to speak a little bit about the Italian experience when it comes to European elections. And one of your national counterparts, Professor or Lecturer Stefano, is here. So you can maybe debate later whether your ideas actually are common when it comes to Italian democracy. But for the time, for next 10 minutes, you have the camera.
Well, thanks a lot. Good morning, everybody. A greeting from Rome, Italy. To be honest, I'd like to share with you an European experience more than a national one. It was European experiences such as a good practice carried out years ago all around Europe. And the topic was the draft of the European Charter of Active Citizenship. The role of the citizens and citizens' organization. Sorry for my voice, but I have a very big throat. So, the role of citizens and citizens' organization as actors of public policy making in Europe is growing in the last 30 years, as you know. Nevertheless, neither the Constitution nor the European legal systems define exactly their role as participants in the political life as a fundamental right of the citizens themselves. So for this reason, my organization, together with many others coming from Austria, coming from Czech Republic, Germany, Portugal, Poland, Malta, Romania, Slovenia, Turkey, and so on, and also with the European think tank, the Active Citizenship Foundation, have decided to promote the drafting of an European Charter of Active Citizenship, which sets out the rights and duties of civic organizations that participate in decision-making processes related to public policies. Well, what is this charter? What's the main goal of these activities? The charter aims to bridge the gap existing in the community rules about the rights, duties, powers, and the responsibilities of civic organizations acting in the public policy cycle. The charter was drawn up on the basis of an analysis of 50 good practices in the relationship within citizens' organizations and institutions gathered in 10 European countries, and of the comments, feedback, and suggestions coming from many other citizens' organizations and public institutions. So it's not theoretical approach, but pragmatic approach. Some other characteristic of this European Charter. Mainly, the Charter concerns citizens' organizations and not individuals. So the involvement of civic organizations. This is very important because it is it's important in order to promote the point of view of citizens organized the civic society. So there are two fundamental reasons why this charter has been drawn up. The existence of a paradox concerning citizens' participation in democratic life of the European Union and the presence of a normative gap in the European legal framework. The paradox is that while citizens and their autonomous organizations are usually asked to contribute with material and immaterial resources to filling the democratic deficit of the European Union, they are at the same time hardly considered and often mistrusted by public institutions. This paradox is linked to a normative gap. While European documents contain several references to the activity of citizens' organizations in the public arena, they completely lack legally binding text defining the roles, rights, and responsibilities of autonomous citizens' organizations, as well as the related obligations of public institutions. So this European Charter aims to addressing this paradox and at filling the normative gap by finally acknowledging the role of autonomous citizens' organizations as legitimate and fundamental actors in the construction of Europe. Just to better define, in the last few days, my organization attended in several meetings in Italy, where a lot of civic organizations are trying to organize themselves in order to push people to vote in the European election. So this is very important, the role of autonomous citizens organizations. So, why should be useful this charter? This charter strength lies on its process of implementation, specifically when serving as a basic for the enhancement and improvement of the relationship between the autonomous citizens organization and public institutions, does neither conflict with the responsibility of public institutions, nor challenge the mechanism of democratic representation in the European Union. The activity of the autonomous citizens organization is rather meant to integrate European institution actions and to enrich democratic life with new energy. Of course, this European Charter draws its inspiration, among the others, from the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. It's composed by 20 articles. Of course, I don't want to read each of these articles, but just to underline that all the other articles are divided into 5 sections: the general principles, rights of civic participations, the public institutions' obligations, the enforcement and the implementations. And annexed to the Charter, there is a summary of national examples for group practices gathered in many countries, as I said before, which were used to identify the rights of the Charter. So, this good practice should be considered as an integral part of the Charter, and of course the integral document, the full document is available for the download by the website of my organization. Well, I just want to underline some rights addressed in this Charter. First of all, the rights, number 2, rights to participation. Each individual has the right to actively participate through autonomous citizens organizations in public life. So, more clarification. There is a statement, and for each right, after a statement, also a little clarification, explanation of the rights. Public life refers to situations and places where issues of general interest are dealt with, including the fields of action addressed by public institutions. Autonomous citizens organizations shall have the opportunity to directly participate in the entire policy-making process, meaning that they shall be considered as one of the key players when setting the public agenda, when implementing the policy, and when evaluating it. It's a very important evaluation point. Furthermore, they shall contribute to the decisions right from the beginning of the decision-making process and not when the decisions have already been taken. The right number 3 is the role of public institutions. The statement says that public institutions value and encourage autonomous citizens organization activities aimed at protecting rights, preserving and or enhancing the common good and or general interest. What's the explanation of it? The public institution, the European Union, that is local, national, and European institutions, shall remove the obstacles to the development of autonomous citizens' organization activities and support them, particularly by putting in place adequate instruments, systems, and processes to promote greater participation, formulating policies in a transparent and clear manner, supporting and collaborating in autonomous citizens' organization initiative and working in partnership with them on common projects. Public institutions shall call for the view of autonomous citizens' organization, encouraging their participation in decision-making processes. Finally, public institutions shall integrate the lesson learned from the best practice in their work standard. As I said, I don't want to read any articles, just should be probably very important, the right number 7, the right to consultation, but I want to underline the public institutions obligation, also because now we are so close with the European institutions, and at the end of my presentation, what should be the message? The message should be that the principle, the rights underlying written in this European Charter should be taken officially for the new and more democratic process at the European level. So the public is...
Just to intervene a bit, you've talked a lot about how this involves the responsibilities of public institutions. Have you managed within your cooperation networks to also have the biggest Italian public institutions sign this, or is it more more of a cooperation between those organizations themselves for now?
Well, the point is that the civic organization, the autonomous citizens organization, want to be clear what is the process of involvement, the process of consultation, the process of evaluation of the public policies, and in all these kind of activities should be clear which is the role of the citizens and the civic organizations.
Of course.
According to this, is very important. The public institutions have to respect some very important topic. For example, the respect of time and obligation to give a feedback. A lot of time, a civic organization provide to information, data, collect online questionnaire coming from the European institution, and then they don't receive any kind of feedback. This is very important because they don't believe anymore or so much to this kind of activities if they don't receive any feedback.
But have you sorry to intervene again, have you managed to get their approval? Are they doing what you want? Or are you still demanding those rights in Italy, for example?
There is a mix of some are mandatory, some kind in some field, in some policies. Some rights of participation, of the involvement, or the right of consultation are mandatory. In other kind of the public activities, not. So our proposal is to officially bring this European Charter in order to approve in European document as a very start point for a new democratic process, new democratic approach of the involvement of citizens and their autonomous citizens organization in the policy making. This is very important topic.
So
I don't know if I have 2 minutes more, or I have finished my time, in order to underline just 2 rights more. I don't know, let me know.
Well, if possible, then maybe as we took a look at the document during the time you were speaking, that we maybe move on, as otherwise we will be not hearing the German experience, which will be a shame, as it is such a huge country with excellent examples, I believe. But thank you very much, Mariano, and I think we will definitely be looking at the charter later and perhaps adjusting it to Estonian national civil society organizations in helping them implement and promote such an opportunity on a European level as well. So with these words, I will move on to Germany, and I believe it is Sophie. Hello, Sophie, can you hear us? Could you say something so that we can make sure we can hear you?
Hi, I can. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you,
yeah?
But somehow the picture comes with a lag.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can maybe speak just a little closer to the microphone so that we can hear you.
Yes. Is that better?
Sorry to put the wire basically in your mouth. All right.
No, it's all right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. I will give you the floor to you for next 10 minutes to speak about what is going on in Germany. And as I understand, you are going to speak about Democratic Europe now, yeah?
Exactly. As the name already states, I actually won't be talking about the situation in Germany, but about another EU-level process. I'm actually very happy to go after Mariano because the campaign that Democracy International is running right now is trying to institutionalize just these types of democratic participatory processes at the EU level. And the campaign that is pushing this forward is called Democratic Europe Now, which Democracy International has initiated, but is running with a whole network of organizations across Europe. A few words on Democracy International. It's an independent, non-governmental organization that agitates for direct and participatory democracy at different levels, at the local level, the national level, and now at the EU level, to involve citizens also on issue-based questions and not just parties every 4 to 5 years. And currently, as I said, we're running this campaign at the EU level, which I'll be going more into. I clearly don't have to go into the status quo of the legitimacy or the democratic deficits of the EU, but I mean, there's two main lines that I'd like to point out again. One is really the institutionalized, the framework which is exhausting the democratic deficit in the EU, top-down decisions, closed-door negotiations in Brussels, a very weak EU Parliament and very little citizen engagement. Now in the crisis we've seen more and more reforms and bodies that have been created outside of the treaties. And at the same time, we have a growing gap between the EU institutions and its citizens, and with this, a plummeting trust and confidence of citizens in the EU institutions. I mean, we see the symptoms, I would say, are rising extremism and nationalist parties, but also Eurobarometer surveys that show that the trust or the distrust is really rising into the EU institutions. So our campaign is really looking at this institutional deficit, and on the other hand, really bring in the citizens into the processes and bring the EU down to the citizens to, in a way, build a Europe of the citizens. We say that, I mean, we really need major changes to the way that decision processes are made, to really open up these processes to include civil society and citizens in the processes, and really institutionalize participatory and direct democratic forms, in addition to strengthening representative democracy. And according to the Lisbon Treaty, the only way to make such major reforms is through having a convention, which is a new body or an assembly which gathers to discuss and draft the proposals. And we've had 2 conventions in the past. The last one was in 2002, 2003 for the Constitutional Convention. So we also see that there's many lessons that we've learned from the previous convention, particularly that the right process is essential to achieving good results. So we need a process which is itself participatory, open, inclusive, in order to come to results that are best suited to answer the issues at hand, or to find the best framework, but also to build ownership and to really have the best results. So this is really where the campaign that we're now running is starting off. The aims of this campaign are, first of all, to push for a new EU convention that will work on strengthening democracy and participation in the EU decision-making processes, or just in general in the EU institutional architecture. Second of all, that this process of the EU convention itself is democratic, transparent, participatory, takes enough time to really build on the proposals, to include civil society in the process, and that at the very end of the process there's a pan-European referendum, so that citizens have the chance to vote on this very important outcome of the convention, but also as a way to guarantee that during the process of, let's say, a 2-year convention, there really will be an open debate that goes beyond political party lines, but really focuses on issues, focuses on the future of Europe, focuses on what place does democracy and do questions of solidarity have in our Europe, in the future of Europe. And so in the campaign, we're working with organizations all over Europe from across the political spectrum, working on different issues. These are organizations or platforms at the EU level, but also in different national contexts. There are organizations working on democracy issues, citizen participation, but also environmental NGOs or organizations working more on social issues or student organizations. So really a broad diversity of organizations that are helping to carry this campaign and to make a very, very strong demand across Europe for the EU convention that can really So I'll briefly go into some of the actions that we have now. Of course, now these actions are primarily focusing on the European elections, partly because, of course, now the attention is in all EU affairs really focused on the elections, on gathering the energy and the attention that is now anyway building up for this, but also as we see that the European Parliament is in a way out of the institutions can you still hear me? I just heard a cut in the sound.
We can hear you, yeah, go on. I was just
okay, great,
sure
okay.
Other officers weren't interrupting, so go on.
Okay. So, and as I was saying, partly it's also because we see the European Parliament as being, in a way, our best ally of the European institutions, as it is in their own interest to strengthen democracy in Europe, but also as that is the institution through which the communication and the consultation and dialogue with citizens and civil society can best be guaranteed. So we have actions which are building political pressure, primarily on the European Parliament, but also that are doing public actions to gain public awareness, public attention, media attention, and to really build kind of hype around this issue, or of course also just awareness and create a debate. So we have, of course, a petition to the European Parliament, which we want to present to the new European Parliament when they elect the Commission President. So time is running out, so of course we ask all of you also to spread this petition. The petition is really a non-partisan call for democratic reforms in Europe, to a convention which works on strengthening democracy in the EU, in which the process itself is done in a very open and inclusive way. We're also doing a survey of all the candidates. Right now there's around 10,000 candidates in all European countries that are running for the new European Parliament. We're already contacting them all during their campaign phase to inform these politicians of a very important issue, but also, of course, to get their promises, their commitment to work on institutionalizing participatory and direct democracy in the EU and for introducing a European convention during their next legislative period, and to, after the European elections, be able to work with these results to push forward the campaign even further. So, of course, also here we're right now in the process of sending them all emails. The most important ones will be calling, will be visiting at their campaign events. So if you in Estonia want to participate in this support by contacting the candidates in Estonia to convince them of this issue, or then afterwards, shortly before the elections, just spreading the results of this is, of course, also a huge help. But then, as I said, we also have some more public actions. We're planning for the 17th of May a Transnational Action Day for European democracy, with a slogan along the lines of "Vote for a better, more democratic Europe." So it's clearly a week before the elections. It's an appeal to go vote, but a conscious vote for more democracy and for more of a Europe of the citizens. And here we're building an information kit with ideas on actions and events that range from creative street actions to events to pressure the candidates for the European Parliament, or public speaking corners in squares or parks to raise a debate amongst the public, to gain media attention, and to really create this powerful feeling of unity across Europe, with events happening in different cities on the same day, making the same demands. Then we have some actions which are more to mobilize people to engage and to demand change. We have one action which is a bit of a guerrilla action. We're printing stickers that say the EU is more than the euro, which will be stuck onto the euro coins themselves, this way circulating this message. The message, of course, saying the EU has huge influences on our lives, and so we must engage, and we need to close this gap. We need to bring the EU closer to the citizens. We need the EU to win back its citizens, but also for the citizens to kind of reappropriate Europe to themselves, to their level. Some other actions that we have that really call for an EU convention that not only works on the institutional reforms, but can really trigger an open debate about Europe, a debate about what kind of democratic values do we want to really put into the basic constitution, but we don't have to call it this way, but really the basic values of the EU. So this is the campaign where we're open for any ideas, any organizations or individual activists that are interested in joining in any one of the actions, or in general just endorsing it officially. We're really happy for any of your feedback.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So some questions, reflections from the audience, perhaps? Yes, we have one. So just a moment. It might be a bit. Well, wait, just come here. Yeah. It will be easier. Yes, here we go.
Can you see me? Yeah, you can. Hi, I'm Stefano Braghiroli, a researcher from the University of Tartu, and I have a question with respect to one of the points that you made, that is basically, you are basically calling for a treaty change and for basically a new institutional structure of the EU, which clearly goes towards a more federal arrangement. Now, the point is that obviously would make, would create a potential to make citizens closer to the EU and make the EU more visible to the citizens. However, my very question is so far I tend to believe that simply not a single government would be really willing to engage again in long-lasting negotiations, which might end up, in a new document with very high chances to be rejected. How do you intend somehow to convince the government to re-engage in a convention and something like that after the kind of the not particularly fortunate experience of the European Convention, the last one?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for your question. You of course have a very crucial point you're making, and also pointing out the resistance of many states. Of course, it's mostly the big states that oppose this kind of a convention or a treaty change, as they know that they are the ones that will mostly be losing out on control in these processes. However, there are very many actors that are already saying there needs to be treaty changes. There needs to be a convention to reassess the post-crisis Europe, to bring in these structures that have been created outside of the treaty. So, for example, the Troika, the ESM, the Fiscal Compact, these have all been created outside of our legal framework. They have to be integrated, and alone for this reason, we need treaty changes. And so here we're saying, once this happens, we first of all have to also bring democracy onto the agenda, and we have to guarantee that the process is not done, again, top-down behind closed doors, but it's truly an open process. Another question is, of course, the public attitude towards this. If we would now go to elections to vote on a new proposal, the likelihood of it of it being rejected is quite high. Which is again why it's so important to guarantee that this process is long enough to really create a debate and to really bring a lot of these questions, these doubts, these fears, different ideas, bring them onto the table, discuss them openly, bring in the media, create more dialogue between the people sitting in the convention and the public, the citizens, the civil society, to really discuss these issues. And I think if the further we prolong this, or the further we push this away, this process of actually communicating with citizens at the EU level, the more we will lose them. The more we will see the rise of populism, of nationalism, and anti-EU movements. And so I think the risk is there. The risk is there, but I think we have to take this risk because otherwise we risk the whole European project. And you made a very quick point about this necessarily leading towards a federalist structure. We, as a campaign, don't take any positions on the type of Europe that we want at the end. We just say what we need is a democratic debate about Europe. We need a forum which is open to be able to bring in, where different actors can bring in their ideas of the type of Europe that we want, and to really create a discussion about this without ourselves saying we want a more federalist Europe. We want a democratic debate about Europe.
All right. Thank you very much. As we are running out of time and we have some time left for discussion among Estonians, meaning that we will definitely be telling you what we discussed, I thank all the participants of this very modern hangout. And also wish you good luck in your endeavors regarding democratic developments throughout Europe. So with these words, I am saying goodbye and waving, and all the participants in their mind at least, and now also live are waving right back at you. So thank you very much, and goodbye. Till next elections.
Bye. Bye.
Nii, no vot, need olid siis muljed Euroopast. Nagu te kuulsite, siis väga palju hullemini, mis on siis meile lohutuseks, et me peame tegema palju vähem tööd kui mõned teised riigid, ja samal ajal ma kujutan ette, et on ka väga palju asju, mis on palju paremini. Aga nüüd me lähme edasi. Meil on siis jäänud selle arutelupäeva viimane osa, mis peakski olema see kõige väärtuslikum, kus me siis mõtleme, et mida meie saaksime ära teha selleks, et kaasamine Euroopa Liidu tasemel oleks parem, seda siis nii valimiste ajal kui valimiste vahelisel ajal. Aga et selleks, et seda teha, siis kuna meid on täpselt selline mõnus arv, siis minu mõte oli, et me koguneme sellisesse natuke hubasemasse ringi ja siis lihtsalt räägime. Ja võib-olla paneme ka mõned asjad kirja niimoodi, et ma võib-olla küsin mõne küsimuse, kuna siis on teil lihtsam mõelda, ja siis me kõik koos vastame sellele. Aga selleks, et seda teha, siis taas kord on teil võimalus haarata küpsiseid, mis on väga maitsvad, ja kohvi ja teed või vett, ja siis tulla siia tagasi ja siis meiega koos korra mõelda, kuidas siis Euroopa Liidu demokraatia nüüd ära parandada. Ehk siis 5 minutit pausi ja siis teeme niisuguse konstruktiivse arutelu.